You people are what? 19, 20, 25, 29, and this video is going to be on an elegy. Death, graveyard, melancholy. Why should this interest you, except for the fact that you have to write answers on this poem in your exams? Let me tell you one thing. Forget about your exams. This is going to be a poem that is going to be exactly on your lives. And this poem is actually about you. Not convinced? Stay with me till the end of this video as we look at every single line of Thomas Gray's massive poem. First, let us know a little bit about Thomas Gray. Gray was a neoclassical poet. Now, what is this neoclassical age? Neoclassical age is the time period just after the Restoration and before the Romantic period. It's also called the 18th century. But we do not call Gray a completely neoclassical poet. This poem is going to give us some insight into why we call Gray rather a pre-romantic. Now, Gray was an English poet of the 18th century and he was also a professor at Pembroke College. He was the sole surviving child of his parents and even he grew up without his father. So eventually when he got enrolled in Eton College, it was like a very good experience for him. He made great friends there, especially two people were very close to him. One was Horace Walpole and second was Richard West. Horace Walpole, the writer of Gothic novels, many of you know him. Now, Horace Walpole, Richard West, and there was another person called Ashton and Gray. Four of them became so close that they started to call themselves the Quadruple Alliance. So things were going on happily for them and they had an intellectual kind of a relationship. They had fun together. And then came 1742. In 1742, his friend Richard died. He was just in his mid-20s. Gray wrote a sonnet on his friend. Much later, in around 1750, he completed writing this poem, which we are going to read today. Now, Gray never wanted to publish this poem. He sent the manuscript to Walpole and somehow this whole thing leaked out and Gray got to know that, his poem was going to be published even without his consent, and maybe it being an unauthorized version, there would have been spelling mistakes and errors and things like that. So he wanted to avoid that. So despite not wanting to publish it, he eventually published it in 1751. So this is kind of a brief background to this poem. And now when we look at the lines, we will try to understand what is the central theme of the poem and what are the ways in which Gray brings out his emotions in this poem, because although he does not mention his friend anywhere in it, we'll have to keep this in mind that Richard's death had always been at the back of his mind. Okay, so let's look at the text. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day, the lowing herd wind slowly o'er the lea, the ploughman homeward plods his weary way, and leaves the world to darkness and to me. This is an elegy. Elegy is supposed to be a poem which people write upon death of somebody they know or somebody who is celebrated. So we are expecting him to write on death of some person. Okay, so he begins with a kind of a setting that he presents in front of us, a backdrop, and he gives us a time of the day, which is twilight. It's going to be evening and night soon. And he uses the word curfew in the very beginning of the poem. Now, during the Middle Ages, in European towns especially, which were often made of wood and they were close together, people had to turn off their fireplaces at a particular time in the evening to avoid any accidents. A bell used to be rung to indicate that particular time in the evening, and this signal was called cover few. Cover, few means fire. It is French in origin. Now, as time progressed, this whole concept of shutting off your evening fire, that became obsolete. But there were certain things which people used to do in the evening, certain regulations they had to follow, for which this bell continued to toll, and the name was still curfew. And then eventually this name got changed into the word curfew. And now we have a political meaning of curfew. It's like a particular time when the government doesn't want people to come out of their houses in groups, and they declare it as a curfew. Okay, so this is the origin of the word. So here when Gray uses the word curfew, he is basically using it in a sense of its original meaning, that it's the church bell which indicates the end of the day or activities of day. You're supposed to go back home if you are in the field because night has set in. So the curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The day is going away and it's as if the day is going to die. And when somebody dies, the church bell rings, and that is called a knell. So this curfew bell is like a death bell for the day. So this whole abstract idea, of day, of evening, that is kind of given an added dimension when he says that this is the time of the day when the church bell is announcing the end of the day. And what happens when this time arrives? Well, first thing is the lowing herd. Herd means group of cattle, cows and sheep. They are going back slowly to their homes, and they're taking a winding road across the valley. The lowing herd, they are making sounds. So lowing is the sound that these animals are making, and they are winding slowly. So the word wind, W-I-N-D, is the verb here. Okay. The ploughman homeward plods his weary way. The ploughman, the farmer who's been working in the field, he goes back home and his steps are tired because he's been working very hard in the field. But he uses this adjective tired or weary in connection with way, as if this road has become tired. But the road is not tired. The farmer who is walking the steps towards home, that farmer is tired. So here the adjective is transferred from farmer, the more appropriate noun, to road, because the road is not tired. This is a transferred epithet. Okay, try to remember this figure of speech. So this is a transferred epithet we see here. And then he says, leaves the world to darkness and to me. So somehow there is a kind of a gelling in of the poet's emotions with his surroundings. He is feeling in tune with the darkness around him. So definitely this poet is going to be a melancholic one, somebody who loves sitting alone in a dark place in the evening, thinking about things about humanity. So we have a poet who loves to be in ambient nature. Now fades the glimmering landscape on the sight. He continues to build that setting in front of us. Now fades the glimmering landscape on the sight, and all the air a solemn stillness holds, save where the beetle wheels his droning flight, and drowsy tinklings lull the distant folds. This kind of lyricism, which I think I find a lot in Tennyson too, this has a lot of assonance and alteration, as if lull your senses into a certain kind of a mood, that melancholic mood. And these words, especially this word beetle, is very significant. If you have read Macbeth, you remember the time when he was talking to his wife about his anxieties with Banquo, and he has these thoughts about killing Banquo at the back of his mind, and there he says, to black Hecate summons the shard-born beetle with his drowsy hums, hath rung night's yawning peal, there shall be done a deed of dreadful note. So beetle is associated, especially the death watch beetles, they're classic symbols of death. They are sounds are supposed to signal that somebody is going to die. But at the same time, look at what the beetle is doing. Droning flight, he's going on about his everyday life. Poor beetle doesn't know he is used as a symbol of death by us humans. So beetle as a symbol of death, beetle as an actual living creature. There is a kind of a complex dichotomy between the two. The line between life and death can be a little blurry, it seems. So we see that as evening settles down, there is a kind of a lively movement in nature which Gray captures for us. Save that from yonder ivy-mantled tower, the moping owl does to the moon complain. So in the previous stanza, he says that there is a solemn stillness in air except the sound of beetles, and he continues the same pattern here, except the sound of the owl. And what is the owl doing? The owl is complaining. Why is the owl complaining? Because the moon has come up and the owl feels that its nest is illuminated by the moon's light and its privacy is invaded. So it's said that the moon is wandering near her secret bower, her home, the owl's home. The moon has come there and has molested her ancient solitary reign. So the owl was the ruler of this place and the moon has come and invaded. So a strange kind of interplay between non-humans. See, the owl doesn't complain to the moon, neither the moon is invading anybody. But this whole idea of seeing the objects of nature invested with human qualities, this is something which we see so remarkably well done in case of romantic poets. We have done many of romantic poets. I've done them with you as well. So you know how nature is conceived by romantic poets as sentient being, as something which has a very tangible set of feelings quite similar to human feelings. So the same kind of things happen here, that non-human entities are interacting and acting like humans in the imagination of the poet. Beneath those rugged elms, now he continues with the setting. We are not yet given any information about the people or the person on whom this elegy is going to be composed. He says, beneath those rugged elms that yew trees shade, where heaves the turf in many a mouldering heap, each in his narrow cell forever laid, the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep. Elm in Celtic mythology, they represent rebirth, regeneration. But the yew tree is sometimes called the tree of life, and it also has connections with the ideas of life, death, resurrection. But interestingly, it's a poisonous tree. So it's the tree where life and death, they come together. So see, the owl, the beetle, the yew tree, the elm tree, they all help to build this idea of the coexistence of death with life. And why is Gray trying to give us this setting? Because he is sitting in a churchyard, a church graveyard. And he says, where heaves the turf in many a mouldering heap, each in his narrow cell, forever laid. Who are forever laid there? In their coffins, in their narrow cell. Cell means a small place, and here this refers to the coffins of rude forefathers of the hamlet. Hamlet means village. Forefathers means the ancestors, the people who have already died. Rude, usually we know that rude means somebody who doesn't have good manners, somebody who hurts other people's sentiments. But rude actually means also somebody who is not urbanized, who is not sophisticated, unlearned in civil manners, in a way, the manners of city life. So this poem is going to be on these rude forefathers of the hamlet. So this is not going to be an elegy on any king who is dead or any nobleman or any friend of the poet as such. This is going to be on a common man living a common life in a very, very small village. The breezy call of incense-breathing morn, the swallow twittering from a straw-built shed, the cock's shrill clarion, the sound of the cock, or the echoing horn, no more shall rouse them from their lowly bed. Now these forefathers who are now lying down in their coffins, they are like sleeping, but they are not going to get up from their sleep by the sounds that the birds make or the usual sounds around us. For them, no more the blazing hearth shall burn. Hearth is the fireplace you have at home, and hearth is a symbol of warmth, of family love, of being together with the people you love. So for these people, there will be no more family time. They will not be with their loved ones. The family hearth will not burn for them. Or busy housewife ply her evening care. No children run to lisp their sire's return, or climb his knees the envied kiss to share. So Gray is creating before us an image of a household where at the end of the day, that tired plowman, he comes back from his field and his wife is busy setting up the home for welcoming her husband back, and the children, they rush and try to get the kiss from the father, and there's a competition who will get it first. So he's creating this happy picture, and then he's making us realize that this is not going to be experienced by these dead people anymore. So this idea of death as a permanent state of negation, that is reinforced here, that everything is temporary, death is permanent. Oft did the harvest to their sickle yield. Now that he has introduced us to the main characters of his poem, the subjects of his poem, he's going to talk about their lives. What did these people do when they were alive? Oft did the harvest to their sickle yield. Now here again he is changing the word order, which is a very common thing in poetry. So he has placed the verb at the end of the line. He says that often when they used their sickle, that is their farm equipments, there was great harvest, return from nature, something nature gives you back when you till the soil. So they had their harvest, their furrow oft the stubborn glebe has broke. So when they tilled the soil, they got back from earth the rewards of harvest. How jocund did they drive their team afield, and they had their great team together. They worked together as a team in the farm. How bowed the woods beneath their sturdy stroke, and sometimes they used to cut down these huge trees for getting wood, and it appeared as if nature was complying to them, bowing down to them. It's as if they ruled nature. But now they are lying in a coffin deep inside the earth, and well, we can't say they are ruling nature anymore, can we? So he gets us this beautiful conclusion. Let not ambition mock their useful toil. We might think that these people, they have so ordinary lives, they don't have ambition, they do not have any glorified achievements to boast of. And so if we are ambitious, or there are ambitious people around us, they would say that these people are ordinary, they just do the useful thing. And Gray says that let not ambition mock their useful toil. Here ambition means, of course, ambition is an abstract idea. He tries to actually mean ambitious people. So let not ambitious people mock or ridicule these people who are doing the useful things of life. Their homely joys and destiny obscure. These people have very homely joys, simple joys, and they have destinies which are not that remarkable. They don't become great people because they do not have great opportunities. Nor grandeur, here with a disdainful smile. Disdainful means when you look down upon somebody as irrelevant. So grandeur should not, if somebody is grand, that person should not make fun of these people. The short and simple annals of the poor. Annals means history, historical records. Now, usually, when you read history books, what do you read? You read about the kings, their achievements, about great rulers, about great wars. Do you read about an individual farmer who is anonymous? We don't. Nowadays, there is a tendency in historians or historiographers to look into these kinds of memoirs, diaries of people who are otherwise unnamed, anonymous in history, and that is called new historicism, you can say. A new way of looking at history where you look at the records which do not form a part of the official government archive. Okay, so in short, this stanza means that if these people are wasting away their life in useful toils, ambitious people should not make fun of these people. We should not look down upon the stories of their lives as insignificant. Okay, so here Gray has established that this poem is not about some grand royal or noble figure, but about nameless individuals of the countryside. The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth ever gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. Almost like Macbeth's primrose path to the everlasting bonfire. We have a lot of influence of Shakespeare on Gray. He often uses Shakespearean images, Shakespearean lines in his poems. Although he ended up publishing only around 13 poems, he was very shy. He didn't want to publish his poems much. He's saying that people are often overtly proud about certain things. One of those things is heraldry. What is heraldry? Heraldry is it's a coat of arms. When, especially if you think about these old British families, aristocrat families, they used to have this coat of arms. It's like a symbol of their family, and they try to put it everywhere around them. On their seals, on their doorknobs, on their necklaces, everywhere. They were so proud of their family heritage and this symbol of their power, of their aristocratic existence. That is heraldry, that coat of arms. So heraldry is associated with pride. Boast of heraldry and pomp of power. Pomp is when you are ceremonious, you are showing off, okay, without being substantial, without actually having anything worthy in you. That is pomp. So pomp of power. All these things are useless in Gray's eyes. And all that beauty, all that wealth ever gave. We achieve things in this world by two things. One is by beauty and one is by wealth. Now, beauty doesn't only mean your face. Beauty means the way the world sees you. So your appearance, your presentation, that gives you things. And wealth gives you things. So these are two things in which you get things in this world. But those things are very temporary because you're going to end up down there if you're a Christian or a Muslim, and when you are a Hindu and you get burned away, ashes. So temporary things, bragging about your family's heraldry, empty ceremony of being in a position of power, beauty, wealth, this is all temporary. What is permanent? The grave, death, that is permanent. Well, that's pretty melancholic, isn't it? And he goes on to just make his point clearer. Nor you proud, impute to these the fault, if memory over their tomb no trophies raise. Now some people are so proud, they would say that these people are so ordinary. Look at their graves, there are no proper tombstones. Now when rich people die, there is this marble vault, and then maybe a ceremonious statue. And these poor people, they probably just have a gravestone, a very humble thing where little things are written. So there is nothing grand about it. So Gray is saying that do not think that because these people do not have great memorials for themselves, that they were not loved by their family, they were not important to their people. Where through the long-drawn aisle and fretted vault, the pealing anthem swells the note of praise. Now when rich people die, there is this huge clamor that people make, and they have these church gatherings where they sing anthems and stuff. Now, so what? I mean, you are rich, you die, 20,000 people sing in your praise, they pray for your soul, you end up there, right there inside the same kind of earth where that poor person is also lying down. Can storied urn or animated burst back to its mansion called the fleeting breath? Suppose you're dead, you have a coffin and you're inside the coffin under this earth, and they have built a statue, bust. The bust is statue up to your breast or chest. So your bust size statue is there, and maybe there is a beautiful vase in which your ashes are stored when you die, and it's a very decorated vase with maybe a poem written on you around it. But will those things be capable to bring back your life? No. So can storied urn is that vase in which ashes are kept. Can those urns in which beautiful stories are written, or poems are written, or pictures are painted, can those urns bring back the life on which it is written or on which it is made? Can that statue bring back the breath of life to the person who is dead? No. Can honor's voice provoke the silent dust? Somebody is very honorable and has died after a grand life. But will death be convinced because that person was honorable? Then Mahatma Gandhi wouldn't have died, Rabindranath Tagore wouldn't have died. Or flattery soothe the dull, cold ear of death. Now death is again personified here. But death is not like a human being. Death has no emotion. It has dull, cold ear. It doesn't matter what you say, death will not listen. So death is kind of an equalizer. No matter how grand a tomb you have or how humble a grave, death is same for all, inevitable, equal. Now he talks about possibilities. What if these people who were poor in their lifetime and are buried now, what if they had possibilities to excel? Maybe many of them had talents which could not flower into something successful because they did not have the right kind of opportunities. Perhaps in this neglected spot is laid, so in that churchyard, some heart once pregnant with celestial fire. So maybe somebody who had great fiery spirit had a rustic life where he was just wasted away and he eventually dies and nobody knows about him. Hands that the rod of empire might have swayed, maybe in other situations this person would have become a king or wake to ecstasy the living lyre. So he could have been a great musician or a poet. But knowledge to their eyes, her ample page, rich with the spoils of time, did never unroll. So knowledge was something that was denied to them. What kind of knowledge? No, not the kind of knowledge which nature naturally gives you. He's talking about the knowledge of the world, the intellectual knowledge that great poets, they gather over time. These were not provided to these people, and so they simply did not know how to channelize their energy, how to channelize their potential. Chill penury repressed their noble rage. They only had to think about things like how to get your next meal on your plate. So it was chill penury, it was poverty. That was the reality of their lives, and froze the genial current of the soul. There was no way they could become great people or remembered in history. Now, I wouldn't agree completely with Gray here, because in India we have seen people who had very humble births rising to great power. Why in India? You see all around the world. See, it's right that normally people who are born in villages do not have opportunities. But if you have that kind of spark, maybe somehow you'll manage to show the world your worth. Nothing can stop you. Nothing can stop you thinking like, if you are in a village, at least in today's context, you can always become more than what you are born into. Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bear. Now we know that there are caves and mountains all buried deep within the ocean, and inside those ocean caves there are gems and expensive stones which simply stay there undiscovered by humans. And if human beings do not get their hands on these jewels, then of course they are not given any economic value. So we can say that these gems are without any economic value when they are inside the ocean caves. There are flowers in the forest, and he talks about them. Full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness on the desert air. Now here comes the neoclassical degree. When you're born into an age, maybe you are trying to bring in these changes. Gray is being quite a romantic most of the time, but he cannot avoid the influence of his age. And his age is the neoclassical age. And neoclassical age is about human beings being at the center. It's about human endeavors, glorifying human endeavors. So, Gray says here, and I would say it's rather a Freudian slip he uses here, that full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness. So if a flower is born in a forest, no human being sees the flower, and that flower blooms and then eventually dries and falls off. Would you call it a waste? So before human beings came to this earth, the plants wasted themselves away? I wouldn't call so. So this is not acceptable if you would rather call him a romantic. No, romantic would actually say that a flower gets its value only when a human being looks at the flower. What kind of a person would say that? A gem is beautiful only if a person sees that gem. So it's more like the kind of philosophy where you would say that whatever I see around me is real, has value, gets existence. So here we have a little bit of neoclassical leaning in Gray. Please forgive him for that, it's okay. So he says that full many a flower is born to blush unseen, full many of gem stay hidden inside the ocean caves. Similarly, many people are born in villages who die without reaching their public glorified positions. Some village Hampden, that with dauntless breast the little tyrant of his fields withstood. Now, John Hampden, he was a politician who fought for the people's rights against an authoritarian king. Now, maybe this village had a man who was like Hampden, but since he was in a village and he could not rise to any high kind of power, doesn't matter. In his village, maybe he revolted against their landowner, their zamindar. So you don't have to actually kill a king to show your rebellious spirit. You can rebel within your small little places. So if you have the spirit of Hampden in you, you can be your local Hampden. So it's a small scale Hampden, you can say, or Hampden scaled down. Some mute inglorious Milton here may rest. Milton was one of the greatest poets, which Gray was quite familiar with. He had read him. And he says that Milton had opportunities. His father brought him up amidst books. He was sent to great colleges. He was associated with noblemen and kings. And he had a life where he could reach that height of glory, you can say, or he could excel in what he had as his talent. Maybe somebody with similar potential was born in this village who could, if he had the opportunities which Milton had, could become a Milton. But since he did not have these opportunities, he could not be Milton. He was a mute Milton, and he was an inglorious Milton. Some mute inglorious Milton here may rest, some Cromwell, guiltless of his country's blood. Now you know about Restoration history. We have made these videos on history of literature, especially because while teaching these individual poems, I feel that it is better if you already have some knowledge about the background of the age. So we have these videos starting from Old English period right up to Victorian England. You should go and watch those. So whenever you are studying a poem, and if you have some idea about the background, the historical background, the contemporaries of these people who were also writing alongside, then you have a kind of greater confidence to face these literary pieces. Anyway, so Cromwell is a person who ended up bringing about the revolution in the Civil War in England. He got rid of Charles I, and along with Charles I, many more people were dead because of this revolution. So Cromwell was in a way responsible for the kind of bloodshed, which, well, from one perspective was quite necessary, because Charles I was impossible, according to many people during the time. So Cromwell was a person who had many people's death on his soul. Okay, so he was guilty of many people's death. So maybe somebody who had that kind of a temperament which Cromwell had, the revolutionary spirit of Cromwell, could have been born in this village. But since, well, he was in this setup of humility, he was in this setup of a village, this local Cromwell could not become responsible for death of many English people, like the real Cromwell. Okay, so he is saying that in a way it is sad that they don't reach their potential because of lack of opportunities. And then he says that that also saves them from committing the atrocities, the massacre that they would have committed if they had the opportunities. So, well, it has two sides. The applause of listening senates to command, the threats of pain and ruin to despise, to scatter plenty over a smiling land and read their history in a nation's eyes, their lot forbid. So he continues the sentence to the next stanza, and he says that the lot, the destiny of these people of the village, their destinies stopped them from achieving things where they would be part of their nation's history, grand history, where, they would have this applause of listening senates, Everybody around you, the ministers, the noblemen would call you their champion, their hero, their ruler. So that kind of a destiny is not for these village people, nor circumscribed alone their growing virtues, but their crimes confined. As I was telling you, that if you give somebody opportunities of growing, you are never sure what he will grow into. He might grow into a saint, he might grow into a serpent. So, on one hand, the lack of opportunities led to the muting of a possible Milton, but it also checked a possible Cromwell. So, their crimes confined. These village people, were they not committing any kind of crimes? Yes. Maybe a little bit of a theft here and there, maybe a little stealing, a little unfaithful behavior of the husband, little bit of crimes there, here and there. But atrocities, where you kill cities, well, if you are going to bomb an entire nation, you have to be as powerful as that nation. If you are a small person, you can harm a small person. So your ability to commit crime somehow reduces if you are given less opportunities. Gray is making some generalizations here, but okay. Let's read. Forbade to wade through slaughter to a throne. How did Macbeth become the king? He went on killing people. He killed Duncan, then in order to remain a king, he killed Banquo, he sent to kill Macduff and his family. So, people become kings by killing everybody in the way. Okay? But these villagers, they do not have that kind of sins on their head. And shut the gates of mercy on mankind. So these human beings who are buried in these almost nameless coffins, these human beings were not capable of committing any major crimes. The struggling pangs of conscious truth to hide, to quench the blushes of ingenious shame. So obviously, if they had not committed any great crimes, they do not have any great shame to add to their misery. Or heap the shrine of luxury and pride with incense kindled at the muse's flame. So, if they were not given opportunity to excel as poets, then that means they were not praising or glorifying in their poetry, kindled at the muse's flame. They were not lighting the flame of their muse. Muse is somebody who inspires you to write poems. They were not writing poetry glorifying bad people, glorifying bad kings just because they sponsored you. So here Gray directly takes a hit at poets who write glorifying verse in praise of kings and noblemen who are not actually virtuous. So in a way he's questioning his predecessors, his contemporaries. At this point I would say he was talking about people like Dryden, because poets had to take sides at times, and even now we see many poets. They take sides with the government, they glorify them because they get sponsored. Simple as that. But this kind of things are never done by these humble peasants because they don't write poetry. So there is no way they are misusing their poetic talents. They are far away from all this complex life of cities, far from the madding crowd's ignoble strife. Their sober wishes never learned to stray. So they had simple lives, simple wishes, and they did not get diverted from their tracks. Along the cool sequestered veil of life, they kept the noiseless tenor of their way. Their lives were noiseless, without much disruption, peaceful. Yet, even these bones from insult to protect, some frail memorial still erected nigh. Now, it's not that they don't have any gravestones. Even when a poor person dies, the family sets a gravestone, a small little, maybe a crooked statue kind of thing, a rock, and some things are written on them, and sometimes they are written by people who are not very good in spelling, so they make mistakes. With uncouth rhymes, sometimes poems are written there, small rhymes. And of course, since they are written by uneducated people, these poems are not very classy. And shapeless sculpture decked implores the passing tribute of a sigh. And still, even if these are not grand-looking statues or great classy poems on their gravestones, even then, when somebody passes across and looks at them, then that person feels sadness. That is the power of death. Because it doesn't matter how grand a poem is written. What matters is that somebody remembers you after you die. And you matter to that person, that there is something written on your gravestone. So this is very important. As I was telling you, death is a great equalizer. Their name, their years. Sometimes only names are written on the gravestones. The years, born this year and then died this year. And spelt by the unlettered muse. And the poetic inspiration of these people, that is unlettered, which means that they don't have the gift of great poets. So they write very simple rhymes on the gravestones. The place of fame and elegy supply, and many a holy text around she strews. So the muse of these poets who write on these gravestones, that muse, she gives them lines from the Bible. So often we see quotations from the Bible on these gravestones because they don't have much creativity. They don't have the ability to do more than simply quoting from the Bible. And many a holy text around she strews that teach the rustic moralist to die. And these quotations from the Bible, they are on death, they are on having faith in God, and they are on accepting death as something which God has planned for you. So these kinds of quotations are written on these gravestones. For who? To dumb forgetfulness a prey, this pleasing anxious being ever resigned. Because human beings, when they resign from life, they don't want to be forgotten. Left the warm precincts of the cheerful day, nor cast one longing, lingering look behind. So is there any human being in this world who, at the moment of death, would not look back and want to stay on, live on? So life is, no matter how rich or poor you are, important to you. It's worth living, okay, mostly for most people. On some fond breast the parting soul relies. Oh, these are so beautiful lines. When we die, what do we depend on? We depend on the fact that somebody will remember us. Somebody will think about us when we are gone. So on some fond breast, we die depending on the memory or the commitment of our loved ones that we will remember you. That gives an ounce of peace when we die, if there is at all any peace possible then. Some pious drops the closing eye requires. All we need is, at our deathbed, we see people who love us, around us weeping badly because they would miss us. That would give us a feeling that our life was worth living, that we have done something in life. That the worst kind of death is when you die alone. Even from the tomb, the voice of nature cries, even in our ashes, leave their wonted fires. So it's like we turn into dust. From dust thou art, to dust to return. But what about our desires? What about the things we crave? Do they die when we die? Realists, scientists would say yes, because desires are nothing but chemical reactions of your brain. But there are so many religious theories saying that desires make you go into the next phase. And we don't know what is right, what is wrong, do we? And Gray, in 18th century, of course, he might have been quite convinced that desires remain even after we die. For thee, who mindful of the unhonored dead, dost in these lines their artless tale relate. Now this is the strangest thing in this elegy. He is saying that you who are trying to talk about poor people in this poem. Who is trying to talk about poor people in this poem? Thomas Gray. So Thomas Gray is addressing himself as you. So he is saying, you who are trying to write a poem on poor men. So he has gone outside himself. He's looking at himself from outside. If chance, by lonely contemplation led, some kindred spirit shall inquire thy fate. If chance, if in future this might happen, that some stranger would be, in a melancholy, contemplative, thoughtful mood, and some stranger would come in a contemplative mood, passing along these tracks, and might ask about you. You means himself. So he's saying that, see, Mr. Gray, you're writing a poem on poor people. What if one fine day a stranger comes here and asks about you, where you are? Happily, some hoary-headed swain may say, some native villager might say, oft have we seen him at the peep of dawn. So that villager would inform that stranger about Gray, that Thomas Gray used to come here in the early mornings. At the peep of dawn, brushing with hasty steps the dews away to meet the sun upon the upland lawn. There at the foot of yonder nodding beech that wreathes its old fantastic roots so high, his listless length at noontide would he stretch. So this man would come in the morning and then he would stay here till noon and pore upon the brook that babbles by, and he would stay here. So Gray is actually talking about himself, that this villager would say that Gray used to spend all his days loitering about here, brooding here in a peaceful way. Hard by yon wood, now smiling as in scorn, muttering his wayward fancies he would rove. So the villager would describe Gray as somebody who would move about, mumbling verses, poems, now drooping, woeful wan, like one forlorn, or crazed with care, or crossed in hopeless love. So, well, that villager might guess that Mr. Gray was crossed in hopeless love. So maybe somebody ditched him and he was sad, and so he was moving around in graveyards. One morn I missed him on the customed hill. So Thomas Gray is going on telling this story of a possible day when a villager would talk about Gray to a stranger, that Gray was a man who used to come here, stay here all day because maybe some girl had been unfaithful to him, maybe he was heartbroken, had a breakup, he moved around muttering verses, and then one day I didn't see him. So Gray is talking about a time in future when he would have died. One morn I missed him on the customed hill, along the heath and near his favourite tree. Another came. Nor yet beside the rill, nor up the lawn, nor at the wood was he. The next with dirges due in sad array. So for 2 days he did not see Gray coming to the churchyard. And on the third day, he saw the dead body being carried. The next with dirges due in sad array, slow through the churchway path we saw him borne. So we saw that poet, that man who used to come and stay here. He was dead and he was carried down. Approach and read. And then he informs the stranger that he is buried here. You can come and read what is there written on his gravestone. Approach and read, for thou canst read. So this villager, of course, he is uneducated, he cannot read probably. So he says that, he assumes that the stranger is literate and he can read. So he says, you come and read the poem. Graved on the stone beneath yon aged thorn. So Gray is talking about a future time when Gray's gravestone would be read by a stranger. And what would be written there on that gravestone? Large was his bounty and his soul sincere. Heaven did a recompense as largely send. So, this man who spent his life talking about humble people in churchyard, he is now buried in the same churchyard. And he says that his bounty was large. He had opportunities. He had a sincere soul. And he had recompense from heaven. So he was satisfied with his life. He gave to misery all he had, a tear. When he was sad, when he was suffering, he just shed one tear. He gained from heaven, it was all he wished, a friend. So when he had died, he must have got his friend, that is God. Or, well, Richard West was dead, wasn't he? So Gray feels that when he dies, he will gain from heaven his friend back. So in a way we can say he's talking about God here, or maybe he's talking about his bosom friend, Richard West, who is probably waiting for him in heaven. Okay, so death here loses its terror. Death becomes a moment of union with somebody you crave for. Could be God, could be your best friend, could be your lover. So here we see a kind of strange melancholic beauty of death, which is painted in front of our eyes. No further seek his merits to disclose or draw his frailties from their dread abode. The writing continues on that imaginary gravestone of Thomas Gray, that do not try to talk about his faults, his greatness, because now he's dead. There they alike in trembling hope repose. When somebody dies, their achievements, their failures, everything dissolves and everything becomes one. The bosom of his Father and his God. So he is now united with God and at peace. So when you look at this last portion, it is very uncanny, very strange, because Gray, when he's writing this, he's alive and he's talking about a future time when he would be dead and he would be buried in this same churchyard. But this churchyard is for humble people, poor people. Is Gray a poor person? Is Gray an unachiever, underachiever? Gray thinks so. So he feels that he would be here buried down with these rude forefathers of the hamlet, and he would have some writings up his gravestone saying that it doesn't matter what he has achieved and what he hasn't. He's finally with his friend and with God. So from the point of view of analyzing this poem, we have certain pointers. We are asked questions like, what is the significance of the title? Analyze this poem as an elegy, as a pastoral elegy, qualities of graveyard poetry. Okay, that's one term I would talk about. And Gray as a pre-romantic poet. Now, the point is, all these are integrally connected. Let's explore one by one. What about the title? The title can be broken up into three components: elegy, country, churchyard. So, in a question like this, we need to see that how this poem qualifies as an elegy, what is special about the setting is country or village, and its relationship to romantic movement. And the third thing about this is, what additional angle is provided by the setting of churchyard? Because it's not just any natural setting, it's a special kind of a natural setting, a graveyard. So now we are taking up the whole thing again, part by part. What is an elegy? Technically, it's a poem composed upon death of somebody close to the poet or someone of great stature. It has certain specific features. You have invocation of the muse, then expression of the poet's grief. When the poet talks about the achievements of the person on whom the elegy is written, praising the dead, engaging against death, and then finally accepting death, acknowledging a hope of immortality, especially of the soul. And we will see how these are are subverted and modified by Gray. See, instead of any specific muse, Gray invokes the entire setting as his muse. So this idea of nature being the muse, this is very romantic. So see how when you talk about this poem as a pastoral elegy, you automatically talk about this as a pre-romantic poem or romantic elements in this poem. So these answers are going to be connected. Alright. This is not composed upon death of an individual. That is, Richard West is not even mentioned here. The lines talk about rustic villagers, their inglorious history, poverty, unambitious life. Death is seen within a natural context. So we can say this poem is more like an ode, although it's called an elegy. Ode is something where you mostly meditate on things, and here Gray is meditating on lives of simple rustic folks. Interestingly, when Horace Walpole's cat drowned in a tub of goldfish, Gray wrote an elegy because Walpole was his friend. The name of that elegy was Ode on the Death of a Favorite Cat Drowned in a Tub of Goldfishes. So when he was writing a real elegy, it was called an ode. And when he is writing an ode, he calls it an elegy. Now actually the real title, originally this poem was called Stanzas Rode on a Country Churchyard. He later on uses this word elegy. So this is again exactly why he is a pre-romantic. Romanticism is essentially about adding strangeness to beauty. It means seeing ordinary things in a new light. It involves speaking about nature, about people who live close to the soil, about imagination, rustic life. Gray's poem has all these elements. So, in a way we can say it is not technically an elegy, but it has elegiac elements. And it has elements of pastoral elegy. Pastoral means elegy which has a setting in a country, or country in this sense, rural setup. So he was different from his neoclassical contemporaries who focused on urban life, on noblemen's achievements, their idiosyncrasies. I remember Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope, and then we have these poems by Dryden, and of course those restoration comedies and heroic tragedies, all talking about high-class people in urban settings. People like Gray introduced the idea of romanticizing the countryside, which was taken to greater heights by William Blake, William Wordsworth, Coleridge, and the rest. Now, it was not only Gray. He, along with poets like Oliver Goldsmith, William Cowper, Christopher Smart, they all brought in these kinds of changes which gradually gave way to Romanticism, eventually through William Blake and then eventually through Wordsworth and Coleridge. And they talked about these melancholic settings, death, mortality, human condition, pastoral life in poems set in churchyards and similar places at dusk or night. So these poets, they were talking about a different kind of setting altogether, and they were called graveyard poets. How is this poem ascribing to that idea of graveyard poetry? See, at the very beginning you have the death of a day. So the setting is there for you. It's written in a churchyard. It's talking about death of poor people. It's talking about melancholic mood in a way. The loneliness, the contemplation, the anonymity and temporary nature of life and achievements. The creepy epitaph to himself at the end. And a very strange thing also happens here. See, human beings are depersonified into statues, that is animated busts and coffins and ashes and urns, and nature and non-human things like owls and beetles and moon, they are given human qualities, often by the use of pathetic fallacy, often by the use of personification. Okay, so turning nature into a sentient being is all that we see here. But why? Why this preoccupation with death? Why this melancholia? Well, if you are the only surviving child with 11 siblings dead when you were growing up, your mother raising you single-handedly while getting rid of your abusive father, and just when you manage to reach a college, feel that you're getting your life back in control, having friends, building a bond with them, your best friend dies. What would you have been if not melancholic and brooding like Thomas Gray? For him, everything was temporary except death. Everything was unreal except death. So he understood, or he had understood by then, that the only thing you can be certain of is that this happiness, whatever you have, is temporary. The only certainty is death. But he is not bitter. Rather, his melancholy has a strange peacefulness about it that soothes the mind. If you have ever lost somebody to death, or maybe somebody had gone away forever, read the poem and trust me, you wouldn't need my explanation to understand him. Gray's words will reach right to your heart, and you would realize yourself why Gray is considered to be one of the most popular poets despite his melancholic attitude. Alright then, this is all we have today. I really enjoyed today's class with you. I hope you have also found this useful. And if you have any comments, any requests, my comment section is always open for you. So, till my next video, stay happy, stay safe. This is Monami Mukherjee signing off.